Hi, everyone. We're going to let people join and then we're going to just start in 1 minute. And we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar on global regulations for software and AI-enabled medical devices. We're going to go over navigating evolving requirements. I'm Gay Esser, the marketing manager here at RegDesk. And if you don't know what we do, we are an AI-powered regulatory information management platform with built-in regulatory intelligence. Our intelligent REM solution allows teams to allows RA teams to leverage AI to prepare, manage, and publish international submissions smarter and faster. To focus on you for a minute, we just want to thank you for spending your time with us today. We will have a Q&A at the end, so if you have any questions throughout, drop them in the chat or the Q&A, and we will go over those at the end if we have time. If we run out of time, we will just send those out when we send out the slide deck and replay, and be on the lookout for those coming out by the end of the week. And now I'm going to introduce our esteemed expert. We have Apurva Kushare, PhD, who works as a regulatory affairs specialist lead here at RegDesk, and she specializes in regulatory intelligence and analyzing regulatory requirements across the US and EU markets. She holds a PhD in business and brings expertise in medical device regulations, regulatory strategy, and market access with the focus on navigating complex regulatory requirements for emerging markets. Apurva, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you so we can get started.
Thank you so much, Gabe, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. So that, as you know, the topic of today's webinar is the global regulations for software and AI-enabled medical devices, navigating evolving requirements across key markets. So today we'll be discussing 5 major markets, and we'll learn more about the requirements, especially for the software devices and the AI-enabled medical devices. So, software and AI-enabled medical devices are transforming the healthcare and regulatory requirements, and they are just evolving very quickly. And so today, I would like you all to join us for an overview of key global regulations, some emerging trends, and also some practical strategies for navigating these compliance across these major markets. So today the attendees would have an opportunity to learn how these software and AI-enabled medical devices are evolving globally. So today we will be discussing about the key differences among 5 major regulatory authorities, and also what are some common regulatory expectations for software as medical devices and also for the AI submissions. In the end, towards the end of the webinar, we will also learn a little bit about what are the best practices for maintaining compliance through the software lifecycle, and also what are some of these strategies for managing regulatory changes across these multiple markets. So here, just to get start off with the webinar, I have created like a global overview on the software as medical device and AI framework across some 10 major markets, but we will only be going through the US, EU, UK, Canada, and Australia today. So as you can see, for the US, we have the FDA medical device framework. We also have some established AI-enabled device software regulations, which are depending on the classification and the pathway. Then in the EU, we have the EU MDR, IVDR, and also we have the EU AI Act, which works in harmony with the EU MDR regulations. And then we have for UK, we have the medical device framework, and also we have the software and AI specific framework, which is still evolving in the UK. In Canada, we have the medical device regulations. For the Australia, we have the Therapeutic Goods Act and regulations plus the ARTG. Then in Japan, we have the PMDA Act, and also we have some guidances on software as medical device as well. And then in China, we do have the medical device framework. Also, in addition to that, we have some software and AI guidances there as well. In South Korea, also have established some guidances on Medical Device Act and also the AI framework. Similar is the case with Singapore. In case of Brazil, we have the RDC 751 2002 plus we have the RDC 657 2002 22 for the software as medical devices. And then in India, we have the medical device regulation rules, which is the 2017, and also the software as medical device guidances are still developing in India. And lastly, Saudi Arabia, we have the medical device law, and also we have some framework on software as medical devices in Saudi Arabia. So the first market here we'll be talking about is the US. So we will go through the regulatory requirements, and also I have, as you can see here on the left-hand side, I have listed down the regulatory elements, and across on the right-hand side we have the requirements for the software devices function and what are some key documentation that is required in order to have the compliance with the regulations in these particular markets. So the first and most important thing is the intended use. So it is very important for manufacturers to clearly define the software functions, the users, patients, and also the clinical purpose. And also, it is important, like the sponsors should consider the risks in the context of the device's intended use. It is also important for the manufacturer to first determine the applicable FDA pathway. So it can be 510(k), de novo, and PMA. So it is important to, have a clear pathway as to, what route the manufacturer wants to take in order to classify their devices. And also, the sponsors should provide the appropriate level of detail in the system and software architecture diagram. So, as you can see, like the software documentation do include some design requirements. We have verification and validation, and also version history. And also, if let's say in case if the device software function uses ML models trained through ML methods, so it can either be like AI ML enabled adaptive models, it can be like NLP, the neural networks. So it is important to for the manufacturer to state like what methods, models, frameworks, and or what kind of platforms were used, and also what data population samples inform the models, and how, when, and where was the data collected. So all of these details are expected to be submitted by the manufacturers. And also another important aspect is the risk management here. So it should be clear in the risk management plan, like how the sponsor plans to evaluate the overall residual risk against the benefit of the intended use of the device. And also, it is important that a summary of the processes and procedures that are in place to manage the software lifecycle development. We have the software configuration, the change management, and also the software maintenance activities should be provided by the manufacturer. Moving on to the next slide, we have the software version history. As you can see, the history of software versions that were tested and documented at the unit integration and system levels are all part of the verification and validation activities. Change management is another important aspect. So assessing like software changes, we also have the PCCP, which covers like certain plan changes. Then we also have post-market. So post-market is also another important aspect that manufacturers should have all the procedures and plan in place in order to monitor defects, any anomalies, and safety and effectiveness issues. We also have standards such as ISO 14971 and IEC 62304, and other applicable recognized standards should also be taken into consideration. The cybersecurity is another important aspect. So addressing the cybersecurity risks and providing the appropriate submission documentation is very critical. So moving on to the next slide, we have some regulatory elements and requirements for the AI medical devices. So in this case, as you know, like the classification is risk-based classification. So the pre-market authorization for an AI device software function with a PCCP must be established through the PMA. Either it can be the PMA pathway, it can be the 510(k) or de novo pathway as appropriate, as a PCCP must be reviewed and established as part of the marketing authorization. Also, just a note, on January 6th of 2025, the FDA published a draft guidance on AI-enabled device software functions, um, which talks about the lifecycle management and marketing submission recommendations. So I have attached all the links to the guidance document that I have referred to. That would be in the last slide as the references. So you can click and take a look at all the guidance documents that I have referred. And the next aspect here we'll be talking about is the AI documentation. So we have some key details that we should look into, which is the model, data, performance, limitations, and bias. So I would like to talk a little bit about the performance evaluation. So a performance evaluation should include the plan for the verification and validation of the entire device following the implementation of each individual modification. Also, we have three kinds of data sets. So one is the training data. So these data are basically used by the manufacturer of an AI device software function in procedures and training algorithms to build an AI model. Then we have the tuning data, which is second type of data set. So these data are typically used by the manufacturers of an AIDSF to evaluate a small number of, let's say, trained AI models. And then we also have something called test data. So these data are used to characterize the performance of an AI device software function. So in general, I would say like this information should describe how the data will be collected, including the clinical study protocol, which includes the inclusion and exclusion criteria, also the information on how the data will be processed, stored, and retained. Also, in addition, I would like to mention the modification protocol should also describe the verification and validation activities. If there are any predefined acceptance criteria, they also should be specified. So all of these will support like each modification to assure that the device remains safe and effective across the intended use populations. So the intended use populations is very, very critical. So I believe like manufacturers should clearly define the intended use. And early on, I would say like all of these procedures and the regulatory folks should be involved early on in these processes. So moving on to the next slide, we have some more elements to talk about, which is the cybersecurity, the AI changes, post-market, and some key principles here. So as part of the quality system for medical devices, including an AI-enabled devices, manufacturers should have post-market performance monitoring plan to help identify and respond to changes in performance in the post-market setting. Also, the total product life cycle of the AI-enabled devices, including collecting evidence to evaluate whether a device benefits all relevant demographic groups such as race, ethnicity, sex, and age, similarly to help ensure that these devices remain safe and effective. So these are some key elements that we discussed for the EU software and as well as the AI-enabled devices that the manufacturers should take into consideration and must comply with. So we will move on to the next country, that is EU. So we'll be talking about the requirements for the software and AI devices in the EU. And also we will talk a little bit about what is the relationship between the EU MDR and the new EU AI Act. So I would like to provide some clarification on these two guidance documents. So as you know, like the main regulation is the MDR, the EU MDR, which applies to the medical device software. The software is expressly included in the MDR definition of the medical devices. And then in terms of software qualification, it is important to determine whether the software has a medical purpose and therefore it falls within the MDR regulation. And also there's a key guidance by MDCG 2019. So it talks about the qualification and classification of software. The latest version is updated in June 17, 2025. Also in terms of classification, the MDR Annex 8 includes, including rule number 11, is particularly talks about some requirements for the software function. In my opinion, I feel like it is necessary to clarify that software in its own right, when specifically intended by the manufacturer to be used for one or more of the medical purpose, is set out in the definition of medical devices. While the software for general purpose, even used in like healthcare settings, or software intended for lifestyle and well-being purposes, is not a medical device. So just to keep that into consideration. So the next slide is about the conformity assessment. Then we'll talk a little bit about the technical documentation, some key UDI criteria, and also risk management. So depending on the classification, the high risk devices generally require notified body involvement. So devices that incorporate electronic programmable systems, including software or software that are devices in themselves, shall be designed to ensure the repeatability, reliability, and also the performance in line with the intended use again. So the software verification and validation, which typically involves like describing the software design and also the development processes and evidence of the validation of the software, are critical. So this information shall typically include the summary results of all the verification, validation, and testing performed by both in-house and in a simulated or actual user environment prior to the final release. So it shall also address all the different hardware configurations and whether the applicable operating systems identified in the information supplied by the manufacturer. So now in terms of UDI, so the software identification shall be considered to be the part of the manufacturing control mechanism and shall be displayed in the UDI PI. So the minor software revisions shall require a new UDI PI and not a UDI DI. So just to keep that in mind. Also, manufacturers shall ensure the safety and performance throughout the life cycle of the software, through a continuous process of clinical and or performance evaluation, including risk management. So these are some key elements to take into consideration. And also we do have cybersecurity, PMS, registration, and some CE marking elements to consider as well. So for cybersecurity, we have the MDR Annex 1 that includes requirements relevant to the software, IT environment, or any unauthorized access and security. In terms of post-market surveillance, we have MDR requires PMS and vigilance plan in place, and there are set requirements for PMS as well. Then, in terms of registration, as we all are aware of, the UDMED 4 modules became mandatory. So the economic operators and devices have UDMED obligations. Implementation depends on the applicable UDMED modules and timelines. Also, in addition to the CE marking, manufacturer demonstrates conformity with the MDR and applies the CE marking. So these are some key requirements when it comes to complying with the requirements for the device software function in the EU. And now we will talk about the AI devices. So we have the MDR and IVDR regulation that applies here as well for the AI devices. And also, in addition to the MDR and IVDR, we have the EU AI Act. Requirements should apply to the high risk AI devices systems as regarded as the risk management here, and the quality and relevance of the data sets used. The technical documentation, which includes like the record keeping, transparency, and the provision of information of the deployers. We have the human oversight, the robustness, accuracy, and cybersecurity should all be taken into consideration. So these are some key elements when it comes to complying with the AI enabled medical devices. So let me talk a little bit about the EU MDR and the EU AI Act relationship between these two documents and guidances. So it basically clarifies that the compliance with the MDR does not automatically mean like it's complying with the EU AI Act, but a manufacturer may need to meet both set of requirements with the MDR, IVDR addressing, some of the medical device safety and performance requirements. And also the AI Act, on the other hand, is addressing the AI specific risks and obligations. So it talks about what are some requirements in terms of the high risk AI systems. So the details are specified in the EU AI Act. So I just wanted to clarify, like, manufacturers have to look into both of these documents um, side to side when it comes to complying with the EU AI regulations. Moving on to the next slide, we have risk management, AI governance, we have transparency. I would like to talk a little bit about some aspects of transparency here and also human oversight. So the MDR, IVDR risk management continues. The AI Act introduces AI-specific risk management requirements for applicable high-risk AI devices, as I mentioned earlier. Also, in addition, like the high-risk AI requirements include expectations around data governance. They have certain technical documentation requirements, record keeping, accuracy, and robustness. So, in terms of transparency, should be required for high-risk AI systems before they are placed on the market or they are put into service. High-risk AI systems shall be designed and developed in such a way to ensure that the operation is sufficiently transparent to enable deployers to interpret a system's output and also use it appropriately. So, an appropriate type and degree of transparency shall be ensured with a view to achieve compliance. So, high risk AI systems shall be designed and developed in such a way that they achieve an appropriate level of accuracy, robustness, cybersecurity, and that they perform consistently in those aspects throughout their life cycle. So moving on to the next slide, I have also attached some hyperlinks here. So as you can see, you can refer to the Article 14, which talks about the human oversight in the law. So I talked about all of these requirements. So we'll talk a little bit about the technical documentation here. So the technical solutions aiming to ensure the cybersecurity of high-risk AI systems shall be appropriate to the relevant circumstances and considering the risks. So the provisions regarding technical documentation, the content of the EU Declaration of Conformity, the provision regarding the conformity assessment procedures, the provisions establishing the high-risk AI systems to which the conformity assessment procedures based uh, are assessed, and also the quality management system and assessment of the technical documentation should be taken into consideration by every manufacturer. So, quality management system and also the applicable AI Act QMS requirements should be considered. So next, we have again the PMS requirement and the CE marking. So the provider should establish a sound quality management system, ensure the ensure that the accomplishment of the regulatory conformity assessment procedure, draw up the relevant documentation, and also they have the established post-market monitoring system. In terms of high risk, AI systems should bear a CE marking to indicate that the conformity with the regulation so that they can move freely within the internal market. So in terms of high risk AI systems, a physical CE marking should be affixed and maybe completed by a digital CE marking. So these are some CE marking requirements to take into consideration. And the next market that we will be talking about is UK. So we have some regulatory elements here and also the requirements in the UK. So the main law in Great Britain is the MDR regulation 2002, which is as amended. And then the qualification part, software is a medical device where its intended purpose falls within the medical device definition itself. Specific software guidance here, so MHRA has established some software application which explains the software apps, how they qualify as medical devices and how they are regulated in the UK. We also have CE transition here, so certain CE marked devices can continue to be placed in the Great Britain market during the specific transitional period under the UK arrangements. Um, so we have some similar requirements here as well in the UK. So the intended purpose that should be like the importance is of a clearly defined intended purpose is key to meeting various aspects of the medical device regulations effectively. And the key elements I would like to talk a little bit more on the intended purpose. So in UK, there is a specific guidance on intended purpose, and they have clearly defined what are some key elements to consider when defining the intended purpose of the device. So the key elements include like the structure and function of the device. It should include the intended population, the intended users, and intended use environment. So in the UK, the devices are classified as 1, 2A, 2B, and 3. The MHRA's conformity assessment guidance explicitly requires approved body involvement, especially for class 2A and 2B, and the framework also applies to the high risk class 3 devices. So the intended purpose refines the safety and efficacy questions that require evidencing through the production of technical documentation. It can be risk management, clinical evidence, etc. So detailed information on the product design should be located in the technical documentation. However, when describing the function of the product within the intended purpose, the key design information and operating principles are essential, and all the details should be provided in the document. So, when the decision to divide into subpopulation is made, a description and rationale provided for the categorization system must also be added in the technical file. So, these are some key requirements here. And then, in order to achieve and maintain regulatory compliance, the product's technical and clinical evidence base must underpin the intended purpose statement. Again, if you cannot assemble a clinical evidence or run a clinical trial to demonstrate that the device meets a level of let's say performance suitable to the intended purpose, then in that case, the intended purpose is likely to be inappropriate. So it is very, very important to clearly lay out the intended purpose of the device. So I've been repeating this element quite a lot. So the intended purpose is very, very critical when it comes to even the software devices and also the AI devices. So also in addition to this, it is crucial to revisit the processes and the intended purpose at key phases of the production development life cycle, which includes the post-market phase as well. So the new evidence and a greater understanding of product performance in the real world setting acts as a feedback loop for many manufacturers, and there can be new information that can be obtained and the intended purpose can further be developed. So, also identifying gaps in evidence that restrict the expansion of the intended purpose elements should be addressed through the planned activities such as the PMCF studies. So, that is another critical aspect. And also, one important thing to note, so before registering device within the MHRA, you should consider if your device is placed on the market and put into service or both. Uh, if a medical device is put into service or placed in the market, then you must register the device within the MHRA. So you have to make sure that you are registered with the MHRA. So here is a flowchart on the general method to craft the intended purpose statement for software as medical devices. So as you can see, the agency has provided some step-by-step procedures on how you can develop the intended purpose statement. So there has been a lot of emphasis on crafting the intended purpose in the MHRA guidance documents. So you can take a look at this document once I share the PowerPoint presentation. So now we will talk about the AI requirements for in the EU market. So AI used for medical purpose can fall within the definition of medical devices. So the current legal framework is the UK MDR 2002 as amended to AI MD in Great Britain. Is there a separate AI medical device law? So currently UK MDR 2002 classification rules apply to both SAMD and also the AI AMD devices. In terms of risk classification, currently MDR classification framework applies. The MHRA considers that existing rules do not always proportionately reflect the software, medical device, or AI risk. And then in terms of AI model performance, manufacturer must demonstrate the safety and performance as appropriate to the intended purpose of the device. And now we will talk a little bit more about the data, transparency, human factor, and good machine learning practices. So currently UK MDR 2002 classification rule, as I mentioned, applies to both AI and software as medical devices. MHRA has identified that the current rules may not proportionately reflect the risk proposed by SAMD and is developing some reforms to introduce more risk proportionate classification. So it is still under development, and we will have some more information on that as the agency releases and updates their guidance documents. So MHRA, US FDA, and also Health Canada, as we are aware, they have jointly identified 10 guiding principles that can inform the development of good machine learning practices. So we will talk a little bit more in the further slides. So here we have the PCCP, as I mentioned, the guiding principles for ML enabled medical devices have been established. In terms of cybersecurity, it's a specific area within the MHRA's SAMD and AI reform program. And also in terms of clinical evidence, the clinical evidence must be appropriate to demonstrate the safety and performance of the software devices. Clinical investigation may be required depending on the device and intended purpose and existing evidence. So MHRA clinical investigation guidance was recently updated, which is 23rd of July 2026. And also the post-market, currently the MDR requires PMS and vigilance plan in place, and AI performance should be monitored even after the deployment. So the next is we will talk about. So I would like to also talk a little bit more about the transparency aspect here. So so the agency has defined certain requirements when it comes to transparency. So the effective transparency should ensure that the information that could impact risks and patient outcome is communicated. It should also consider the information that the intended users or the audience needs and the context it is used in. So it is important to take the intended user into consideration. Um, and the effective transparency also uses the best media, timing, and strategy for successful communication. It relies um, on a holistic understanding of it also holistic understanding of the user's environment and workflows. So the another important concept related to transparency is human-centered design. So this is an iterative process that addresses the whole user experience and involves some relevant parties through the design and development. And also developing MLMDs with a high degree of transparency, validating the transparency, and ensuring that the users have all the device-related information that they need. So these are some important considerations in order to comply with the effective transparency aspect. And as I mentioned, like the FDA, Health Canada, and MHRA have identified the guiding principles. So I would just like to highlight the principle 7 focuses on uh, the main focus of the principle 7 is on the performance of the human AI team, whereas the principle 9 talks about the users. It provides clear, essential information in terms of the users. So while the guiding principle presented here promote transparency of the MLMDs, the good practices should be considered for all the medical devices. So it is important to refer to all the 10 guiding principles here mentioned. And so we will again talk a little bit about the classification here. So the Canada has let me just see. So we have covered a little bit more information on the MHRA, and now we'll move on to the next country, which is Canada. So the main law here is the FDA, and we also have the medical device regulation, that is SOR 98282. The qualification here is like the software that meets the medical device definition is regulated as medical devices. So in Canada, we have the risk-based classification, that is class 1 to 4 system. And also the software specific classification here in Health Canada, risk classification rules are applied to software based on the function and risk associated with the device. So in terms of license, as we all are aware, like class 2, 3, and 4 medical device generally require the MDL, whereas class 1 requires the MDEL. So moving on to the next slide, the class 1 generally does not require an MDL, as I mentioned. And also in terms of importer and distributor, so I would like to highlight some key points here. So the importers and distributors must hold an active MDEL to import or distribute all classes of devices in Canada. So in general, you require an MDEL if you import or sell a medical device for human use in Canada. So before submitting a new medical device license application or medical device license amendment application, you need to make sure that you complete the device license REP application forms and fee forms. You may also choose to have a regulatory correspondent complete and submit the application on your behalf. Also, it is important to sign the application form, certifying that all the requirements in the application is accurate and complete. And then it is also important to submit the quality management system certificate with the application. All medical devices must be safe and effective for their intended use, and also clinical evidence should be demonstrated. The device is safe and effective when used as per the statement on the indications for use, and also how the device affects the diverse subpopulation, such as women, gender diverse people. There is also racialized minorities. We have pediatrics and older population to also take into consideration. Also, manufacturers must also provide information on the risk and the benefits associated with the use of the device, and also the uncertainty associated with how accurately they can define the risks and the benefits of the devices. So all of these considerations should be taken by the manufacturers, and all of these details should be provided. And then we will talk about we'll talk a little bit about the safety and effectiveness and also the clinical evidence. So Health Canada has current guidance on clinical evidence requirements for medical devices. So I have attached all the guidance documents towards the end of the slides. And then we will talk a little bit more about the software lifecycle, cybersecurity, PMS, and also the changes that could affect the safety and effectiveness. So, in terms of software lifecycle, it is important for the manufacturers should to address the software design, the risk management, verification, validation, the lifecycle controls as applicable. Health Canada expects the risk management throughout the device lifecycle, including for the devices consisting of or containing a software. In terms of cybersecurity, it is also established in the Health Canada requirements, and also the manufacturers of software containing devices should incorporate cybersecurity into design, risk management, verification, validation, and lifecycle monitoring. Then we'll also talk about PMS and vigilance. So Canadian requirements include post-market surveillance, incident reporting, recalls, and safety monitoring obligations for medical devices. Talking about changes, making changes is also an important aspect, and also the manufacturers should make sure that the changes that they are making is not impacting the safety and effectiveness of the device, and if it's impacting the safety and effectiveness, then further assessment should be done. So the changes that could affect safety and effectiveness of a licensed class 3 or 4 devices may constitute a significant change. So it is considered as a significant change, and it can require license amendment before the implementation. And also in terms of software changes, if they are specifically addressed, including changes affecting the intended use, performance, risk, and risk control. So all of these factors should be taken into consideration when making changes to these devices. So now we will talk about the regulatory elements and requirements for the AI ML medical devices. So the primary law here again is the Food and Drugs Act and also the medical device regulation. In terms of AI specific guidances, pre-market guidance for machine learning enabled medical devices, current Health Canada guidance is available, which was published on April 1, 2026. So the scope of this guidance is basically it applies to the machine learning enabled medical devices and also focuses on the ML component within the medical device license application. In terms of classification, ML enabled medical devices are classified under the existing medical device regulatory framework as class 1, 2, 3, or 4, depending on the applicable classification rules and again the intended use. So talking about pre-market submission, so manufacturers should provide information addressing the ML system, its development, validation, and also the performance studies. So again, we are talking about some of the key elements here, which is the intended use. We have the model description, training data, performance, and bias or subgroup performance. So I'll talk a little bit more on this as well. Again, it is important to clearly define the intended use, the medical purpose, the intended users, target population, and clinical role of the ML enabled medical devices. In terms of model description, it is important for the manufacturer to describe the ML model functions, some the inputs, outputs, also the architecture, the diagrams or relevant characteristics as appropriate to the device and risk. In terms of training data, describe the data sets and some relevant data characteristics used for the development, training, and validation, including the data uh, provenances and also the representativeness where applicable. Also in terms of performance. So performance is also one of the critical aspect when it comes to AI ML devices. So the manufacturers must demonstrate appropriate analytical or technical and clinical performances as applicable using the evidence appropriate to the devices, again, intended use and risk. So for any class 2, 3, or 4 ML medical devices, the intended use or the medical purpose should be made clear in the application. And so it is important for the manufacturer to provide all the relevant information, which includes the intended use, the indications of for use for the MLMD devices, the medical purpose. So, for example, it can be like for diagnosis, treatment, or monitoring, and also the intended conditions and diseases or disorders. It is also important for the manufacturers to provide the intended patient population, the intended user, the intended use environment, device function information as applicable, and also the software input and software output as explained on how the software output fits the healthcare workflow there. So these are some key technical documents to consider, and also the manufacturers should provide detailed description of the ML methods, the training algorithms, the architecture, as well as the required input specification sources or any output operating parameters and other relevant characters. Also, Health Canada recommends considering the sex, gender, racial, and ethnic minority details to be provided. So, as I mentioned, the current guidance was published on April 1, 2026, so you can refer to the guidance for more details. And now we will talk about the transparency a little bit. So, transparency regarding the intended use, development performance, any logical explainability, limitations, biases, data characterization, gaps, risk, and lifecycle maintenance should be considered. So, in terms of a significant change requires an amendment, license before the modified device can be marketed and sold. So, this is an important point to keep in mind. So, it is important to amend the license before the modifications are being made and before the device is placed on the market. Also, Health Canada considers cybersecurity part for the medical devices design and life cycle, and also recommends incorporating cybersecurity into risk management, verification, validation, secure design, and ongoing monitoring, and also the emerging vulnerabilities and threats. Also, another important thing is that manufacturers should consider including a description of the processes, the surveillance, and the performance monitoring plans, and also risk mitigations in place to ensure that the ongoing performance and the intercompatibility of the ML systems are in place. So one another important thing that I would like to talk here is Health Canada considers the product life cycle information to be an essential in demonstrating the safety and effectiveness of the MLMD. So the following components should be considered. So you can maybe take a note of this. So the following components are like good machine learning practices, design, risk management, data selection and management, development and training, testing and evaluation. Then we have the clinical validation, transparency, and post-market monitoring. So all of these elements are considered essential by the Health Canada in order to demonstrate safety and effectiveness of the MLMD devices. So now the last market that we will talk about is Australia. So we have the main law, which is the Therapeutic Goods Act of 1989, plus we have the Therapeutic MDR 2002. Again, the qualification, the software is regulated when it meets the definition of a medical device under 41BD of the Therapeutic Goods Act, unless it is excluded or exempted. So software guidance, the current TGA guidance is titled as Understanding How We Regulate Software-Based Medical Devices, which was published on 24th of February, 2026. So I have attached all the references in the last slide of the presentation. And moving on to the next slide, we have the medical devices generally need to be included in the ARTG, which is the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods, before a legal supply, unless excluded or exempted. The classification is again risk-based classification under the MDR. So the manufacturers must consider like all the classification rules in classifying their medical devices. And when more than one rule applies, the device must be classified at the highest applicable level. So TGA requires evidence that the appropriate conformity assessment procedures has been applied and that the device complies with the essential principles. So these are some key details to consider. Yeah, and then we'll talk a little bit about cybersecurity. So for software-based and connected medical devices, cybersecurity should be addressed as part of the device's safety, risk management, and lifecycle processes, consistent with the applicable TGA regulations and also the guidances. Now we will also talk a little bit about the labeling aspect here. So, software and AI medical devices must comply with applicable labeling and advertisement requirements. Must comply with the applicable device labeling and advertisement requirements, as I mentioned. Digital labeling must provide relevant information, such as the intended purpose, instructions, warnings, and also any software version built information. Then also information on advertising must also be truthful and evidence-based and not misleading. So all of these aspects need to be considered when drafting a label and also the advertisement material. The sponsors and manufacturers have ongoing post-market responsibilities, which include monitoring safety and performance, any reporting adverse events or any issues, responding to emerging risks, and undertaking safety actions where necessary. So here is an important note again to make regarding UDI. So the Australian UDI system is being implemented progressively, with implementation requirements and timing varying, according to the relevant medical device categories and risk classification. So the Australian UDI system is being implemented in phases. So you can make a note of these timelines if you want. So mandatory compliance begins 1st of July 2026 for class 3 and class 2B medical devices, followed by class 2A on 1st July 2027, and also class 1S on 1st July 2028, and IVD classes on some later dates. So these are some important dates to keep in mind. And now we will talk a little bit about the AI requirements in Australia. So there is no separate comprehensive AI medical device law currently in Australia. So we have the TGA AI and medical device software regulation, which was recently updated on 5th of February 2026. So software and AI that meets the definition of medical devices generally must be included in the ARTG before it can be legally supplied in Australia, unless an applicable exemption applies. Also, an important note, manufacturers must hold sufficient evidence to demonstrate compliance with the essential principles, like for AI ML functions. The evidence should allow TGA to evaluate the safety and performance, including the appropriate verification and validation of the AI function. Um, So we'll talk a little bit more on the evidence to support the AI devices. So the clinical evidence must support the device's safety, performance, and intended purpose, with evidence appropriate to the device's intended purpose and risk. Again, the information supplied with or within software or AI medical devices must be sufficient to support the safe and appropriate use of the devices. Also, in addition, human factors, usability, clinical workflow, and the interaction between the user and software should be considered where relevant to define the safety and effectiveness of the device. In terms of cybersecurity, it's relevant to the software AI medical devices, and also the performances should be addressed through the risk management, secure design, verification, validation, and also the lifecycle controls. So changes to software or AI functionality must be assessed to determine whether they affect the compliance with the essential principles and also the applicable regulatory conformity assessment requirements. So these were some key aspects to keep in mind when it comes to the AI requirements here in Australia. And yes, I have discussed pretty much all of these main elements. And here I have provided a summary table on what are some of the key differences um, between these five markets. So you can take a look at this table and see, what are some key differences, and also conclude like what is the current thinking of the authorities on these two topics, especially considering the software and also the AI devices. So this has been provided, and also talking about the best practices and regulatory management changes. So here are some key takeaways. So I would say like the manufacturers should maintain one global software, medical device, or AI lifecycle framework, and it should cover all the elements of risk management, software verification, validation, cybersecurity, clinical evidence, AI model validation, change control, and PMS across the US, EU, UK, and Australia. And for every software or AI update, it is important to perform a country specific regulatory impact assessment to determine whether the new evidence notification or submission is required. Also, the manufacturers should continuously monitor FDA, EU, MDCG, also Health Canada and TGA regulatory changes, and also maintain a centralized requirement matrix. It is also important to take into consideration the local requirements, especially the medical device definition. Some countries, as I talked about, like they have some specific requirements on intended purpose. So it is important to read through the current guidance document that has been published by the health agency, and also the use of PCCPs where applicable, the control model or data versions, and also the link to PMS and real world AI performance back to the change control is also helpful for the manufacturers to get that feedback loop. So yes, so if you have any questions, we would love to address those questions sometime later.
Yeah, we
And
have a couple minutes and I think we just have a
okay.
couple questions. So let's see if we can get through these with the last little bit of time that we have. The first question is, how should a manufacturer determine whether a software update is a new device, a significant change, or routine maintenance when the answers differ the answer differs by market?
Yes, so I feel like the manufacturers should start with the approved or clear intended purpose. So I've been talking a lot about intended purpose, and also the risk aspect of the device throughout the presentation. So that is very critical. And also the manufacturers should then assess the proposed change against each jurisdiction changes and rules rather than assuming that one global determination applies everywhere. The assessment should also consider like whether the change affects the intended use, the clinical functionality, the algorithm performance, the risk management, as well as the interoperability. We have cybersecurity, user interface, or the evidence supporting safety and performance. So I have talked about all of these key elements throughout the presentation today. So that should help.
Yeah, that should definitely help. And I appreciate you adding all the extra information in there too. I know there was so much information to cover and you weren't able to get through every piece of every slide. So I'm glad you put it in there for everybody to be able to go back and look at. Let's go through, I think we have two more questions. How should regulatory teams handle a single global AI model when training or validation data may not represent every country where the device will be marketed?
Yes, so in my opinion, like a global model does not necessarily require a separate model for every market. So the manufacturers should be able to justify that the evidence is representative of the intended population, again, the clinical setting, the workflow, and the relevant sources of variability of each target market. So the regulatory question is like whether the differences, the demographics, the disease prevalence, or even the clinical practice, language, the data acquisition, or other local factors could materially affect the performance. So, as I mentioned, the manufacturers should consider the local requirements and what are some of the intended purpose requirements, and also the clinical and PMS requirements when it comes to handling this thing instead of handling a single global AI model.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. And we did have one question about what is a link to monitor the NVCG documents. We will include that with the replay and slide deck, so be on the lookout for that to come out for you. So we'll make sure that we have that for you. I think that's good with the questions. If you have any other questions, feel free to reply to the email that I send out with the replay and slide deck, or send us to anybody here at RegDesk. We're happy to help answer any questions. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you, Jody, for joining. We appreciate you being here to go through and be here to answer any questions if we have anything that stumps us. And then Apurva, again, thank you so much for all the valuable information and for putting this all together in such a concise, easy way for everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Gay. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Yeah. Thank you.